The USS Meridian sat motionless in the harbor like a dying whale, her once proud hull now streaked with rust and neglect. Steam no longer rose from her stacks, and the silence that surrounded her was deafening to anyone who remembered what a warship should sound like. The 400-foot destroyer had become the Navy's biggest embarrassment, a floating monument to bureaucratic failure and mechanical breakdown. Captain Rodriguez stood on the pier, watching seagulls perch carelessly on the ship's radar equipment. 3 months ago, he had been given command of what the brass called a routine maintenance issue. What he found instead was a vessel so broken that even the rats had abandoned it. The engine room was flooded with contaminated fuel, the electrical system sparked randomly like a broken Christmas tree, and the navigation computers hadn't worked since the Clinton administration. The crew of 200 sailors had been reduced to a skeleton team of 30, most of whom spent their days playing cards and counting down until their transfers came through. Morale wasn't just low. It was non-existent. The ship's nickname among the fleet had changed from the Sword to the Anchor, and everyone knew why. She wasn't going anywhere. Admiral Patricia Hawkins arrived at the base on a gray Tuesday morning, her staff car cutting through the fog that seemed to permanently shroud the harbor. She had built her reputation on turning around impossible situations, but even she felt a chill when she saw the Meridian. The ship looked like it belonged in a maritime graveyard, not an active naval base. The briefing room was thick with tension as Captain Rodriguez laid out the problems. Engine failure, electrical fires, contaminated fuel systems, corroded pipes, broken radar, communications equipment held together with duct tape, and a hull that leaked in 17 different places. The repair estimates ranged from $50 million to complete replacement. The timeline stretched into years. Admiral Hawkins listened without expression, her weathered hands folded on the conference table. She had seen disasters before, but this was different. This ship wasn't just broken, it was cursed. 3 different repair crews had given up. 2 contractors had walked away from lucrative deals rather than deal with the Meridian's problems. The ship had become a career killer. "What about the crew?" she asked. Captain Rodriguez shifted uncomfortably. "Most requested transfers, the ones who stayed, well, they're good sailors, but they've lost hope. You can't run a ship when nobody believes it will ever run again." The Admiral stood and walked to the window overlooking the harbor. The Meridian sat there like an accusation, a reminder that even the world's most powerful navy could fail. But as she stared at the broken ship, something else stirred in her memory. A conversation from 15 years ago in a similar briefing room about another impossible situation. She remembered a chief petty officer who had saved her first command when everything seemed lost. A man who could look at a pile of scrap metal and see a working machine. Someone who understood that ships weren't just steel and engines. They were living things that needed the right touch to wake up. "I need to make a phone call," Admiral Hawkins said quietly. The call went out that afternoon to a small town in Montana, where Sam Mitchell was fixing his neighbor's tractor. At 62, Sam had been retired from the Navy for 8 years, living quietly on a small ranch where the biggest mechanical challenge was keeping old farm equipment running. His hair was completely gray now, and his hands showed the scars of 4 decades working with machinery, but his reputation in Navy circles remained legendary. Sam had served on 17 different ships during his career, and every single one had run better after he was aboard. He wasn't an engineer or an officer, just a chief petty officer who understood machines in a way that couldn't be taught in any school. Other sailors said he could hear what engines were thinking, that he could diagnose problems by the sound of metal breathing. When his phone rang and he heard Admiral Hawkins' voice, Sam was surprised. They had served together once, years ago, when she was a young lieutenant commander struggling with a rebellious destroyer off the coast of Somalia. He had turned that ship around in 6 weeks, and she had never forgotten it. "Sam, I need you to come back," she said without preamble. One more time. Sam looked out his kitchen window at the mountains, then at his hands, still strong despite the years. How bad is it, Admiral? The worst I've ever seen. The ship is completely dead. 3 repair teams have quit. The crew has given up. Congress is talking about scrapping her and using the metal for monuments. There was a long pause. Sam had sworn when he retired that he was done with the Navy's problems, done with impossible repairs and hopeless situations. He had earned his peace, earned his quiet life among the mountains and fields. But somewhere in the back of his mind, he could hear the sound of a ship's engines, the rhythm that had been the soundtrack to most of his life. He thought about sailors sitting idle on a dead ship, their careers stalling because their vessel had become a floating failure. What kind of ship? He asked. Destroyer, USS Meridian, Arleigh Burke class. Sam knew that class of ship intimately. He had served on 2 of them during his career, beautiful vessels when they were running properly. In his mind, he could picture every system, every pipe, every wire that made such a ship function. The idea of one of them sitting dead in harbor bothered him more than he wanted to admit. I'm not getting any younger, Admiral, and I'm not active duty anymore. I can't just give orders and expect people to follow them. You won't be giving orders, Sam. You'll be doing what you've always done, making broken things work again. The crew will follow you because they'll see results, not because of your rank. Sam walked outside and stood in his driveway looking at the pickup truck he had been planning to restore, the small projects that filled his retirement. Then he thought about that destroyer sitting silent in some harbor, her crew demoralized, her potential wasted. When do you need me? He asked. 3 days later, Sam Mitchell walked up the gangway of the USS Meridian carrying nothing but a small duffel bag and a toolbox that had traveled the world with him. The sailors who watched him board saw only an old man in civilian clothes, someone who looked like he should be fishing rather than fixing warships. Captain Rodriguez met him at the top of the gangway, uncertain what to expect. Admiral Hawkins had told him only that help was coming, someone who could wake up the ship. What he saw was a gray-haired man in jeans and work boots who moved with the careful confidence of someone who had spent decades in engine rooms. Chief Mitchell? The captain asked. Just Sam now, sir. I'm not active duty anymore. Admiral Hawkins asked me to take a look at your ship. As they walked through the vessel, Sam said nothing, just listened. He stopped occasionally to touch a bulkhead or put his ear against a pipe, his expression unreadable. The few crew members they passed watched curiously, but without much interest. They had seen consultants and specialists before, and none of them had made any difference. In the engine room, Sam stood for a long time among the silent machinery. The massive turbines that should have been humming with power were cold and still. Pipes that should have carried steam were dry. The heart of the ship had stopped beating months ago. The crew thinks she's cursed, Captain Rodriguez said quietly. Sam smiled for the first time since boarding. Ships aren't cursed, Captain. They're just misunderstood. This one's been hurt, and nobody's taken the time to figure out what's really wrong with her. He opened his toolbox and pulled out a small flashlight, then began examining the engine systems with the methodical patience of a doctor checking a patient's pulse. What he found in that first hour told him everything he needed to know about why the Meridian was dead in the water. The real problems weren't the ones listed in the repair reports. Those were just symptoms. The ship was dying because nobody had treated her like a living thing, just like a collection of replaceable parts. And Sam knew that the hardest part of his job wouldn't be fixing the machinery. It would be convincing a demoralized crew that their ship could live again. Sam Mitchell began his resurrection of the USS Meridian at 5:30 the next morning, long before the skeleton crew had stirred from their bunks. He moved through the ship like a ghost, learning her secrets in the pre-dawn darkness. Every ship had a personality, and the Meridian was angry. Angry at being abandoned, angry at the rough treatment from repair crews who had given up, angry at sailors who no longer believed in her. In the engine room, he discovered the first real problem hidden beneath months of failed repair attempts. The previous maintenance team had replaced a crucial pump with the wrong model, one that created vibrations throughout the entire propulsion system. It was like putting the wrong size heart in a body. Everything else started failing because the fundamental rhythm was wrong. Petty Officer Jennifer Santos was the first crew member to find him there, crawling inside a turbine housing with nothing but a pocket flashlight and 40 years of experience. Santos had been on the Meridian for 2 years and had watched her slowly die. She had requested transfer twice, but something kept her aboard. Maybe stubbornness, maybe hope. "Sir, you shouldn't be in there without safety equipment," she said, though she was impressed that anyone was willing to get that deep into the machinery. Sam's voice echoed from inside the turbine. "Can't feel what the metal's telling me through gloves and goggles. This old girl's been trying to tell people what's wrong for months, but nobody's been listening." He emerged covered in grease, but smiling. The first genuine smile anyone had seen in the engine room since the ship broke down. "Santos, right? I read your maintenance reports. You're the only one who's been paying attention to the real problems." Santos felt something she hadn't felt in months. Pride. Her reports had been dismissed by the contractors and previous repair teams, who were focused on big, expensive solutions rather than the small details that actually mattered. "What did you find, Chief? Sam?" "Wrong pump installed backwards, creating a harmonic frequency that's been shaking this ship apart from the inside, plus about 15 other problems that stem from that one mistake. But here's the good news. She's not dying. She's just been fighting the wrong parts for so long that everything else started breaking down. Word spread through the ship that the old civilian was actually doing something different. Instead of bringing in expensive replacement parts, he was fixing what was already there. Instead of working from manuals, he was listening to the ship herself. Within a week, something remarkable began happening. Crew members started volunteering to help. They were drawn by curiosity at first, watching this old man perform mechanical surgery with tools that belonged in a museum. But as they worked alongside him, they began to understand what he understood. The Meridian wasn't a collection of separate systems, but a living machine where everything affected everything else. Machinist's mate Carlos Rivera had been ready to leave the Navy entirely, his confidence shattered by months of mechanical failures. But when Sam asked him to help rebuild a fuel injection system, using Rivera's welding skills in a way no previous repair team had attempted, something changed. Rivera remembered why he had joined the Navy in the first place, the satisfaction of making complex machinery work perfectly. "The contractors kept replacing whole assemblies," Rivera told his bunkmate after a long day working with Sam. "This guy rebuilds them piece by piece until they're better than new. He's teaching me things they didn't cover in technical school." Sam's approach was revolutionary in its simplicity. Instead of following standard repair protocols, he treated each repair as a custom job. He studied how the Meridian-specific systems interacted with each other, learning the ship's individual personality rather than applying generic solutions. The breakthrough came 3 weeks into his work. Sam had identified the root cause of the electrical failures that had plagued the ship. Water intrusion that created corrosion in unexpected places. But instead of replacing miles of wiring, he developed a technique for treating the corrosion chemically, then sealing the systems in a way that would prevent future problems. Electronics technician Michelle Park worked beside him for 12 straight hours, learning techniques that weren't in any manual. "How do you know this will work?" she asked as they applied his improvised corrosion treatment. "Because I'm listening to what the ship is telling me," Sam replied, his hands working steadily on delicate connections. "Every ship talks, if you know how to hear her. This one's been screaming for help for months, but everyone was too busy following procedures to listen. When they energized the first repaired electrical panel, something magical happened. Lights came on throughout an entire section of the ship, lights that had been dark for months. The sound of fans starting up, of systems coming back to life, drew crew members from all over the vessel. Captain Rodriguez found Sam in the engine room that evening, covered in oil and grinning like a kid with a new toy. Around him, machinery hummed quietly. Not at full power yet, but alive in a way it hadn't been since the breakdown began. "How much longer?" the captain asked. "2 more weeks to get her breathing properly," Sam said, patting a massive turbine housing like he was stroking a pet. "Another month to get her running at full capacity. But she'll never break down like this again. Not if the crew keeps treating her right." The transformation wasn't just mechanical. As systems came back online, the crew's attitude changed dramatically. Sailors who had been going through the motions for months suddenly had purpose again. They competed to work alongside Sam, eager to learn his techniques and prove that their ship could be great again. Seaman David Chen, fresh out of basic training, had arrived on the Meridian expecting to learn from experienced sailors. Instead, he found a demoralized crew and a broken ship. But working with Sam changed everything. "He doesn't just fix things," Chen told his family in a letter home. "He teaches us to think like engineers, to understand what the ship needs before she tells us she's broken." The Navy brass, who had written off the Meridian, began taking notice. Admiral Hawkins visited during the 4th week and found a vessel that was not just running, but running better than it had when it was new. Sam's modifications had improved efficiency, reduced maintenance requirements, and solved problems that had plagued the entire ship class. "He's not just fixing the Meridian," she told Captain Rodriguez privately. "He's creating a template for how these ships should really work." But the most remarkable change was in the crew themselves. Sailors who had been counting days until their transfers were now requesting to stay aboard. The ship had become a place where they were learning advanced techniques, where their contributions mattered, where they were part of something special. Sam worked 18-hour days, driven by a passion he had thought was behind him. The Meridian had awakened something in him that retirement couldn't satisfy. The deep satisfaction of bringing a complex machine back to life, of teaching young sailors that mechanical problems were just puzzles waiting to be solved. As the ship's systems came back online one by one, Sam began planning his exit. His job was almost finished, and he had always known this was temporary. But leaving was harder than he had expected. The crew had become his crew, and the Meridian had become his ship in a way that transcended official assignments. On the night before the sea trials that would officially restore the ship to active duty, Sam stood alone on the bridge, listening to the sounds of a living vessel. The engine room hummed with perfectly synchronized machinery, the electrical systems maintained steady power throughout the ship, and the Meridian moved gently at her moorings with the rhythm of a sleeping giant ready to wake. Tomorrow she would prove herself at sea. But tonight, Sam knew his work was complete. The ship that had been dead in the water was not just alive again, she was better than she had ever been. The morning of the sea trials dawned clear and bright, with a steady breeze that seemed to whisper promises to the USS Meridian. Admiral Hawkins stood on the pier alongside a collection of Navy officials, defense contractors, and engineers who had come to witness what many considered impossible: the resurrection of the Navy's most notorious failure. Captain Rodriguez took his position on the bridge with confidence he hadn't felt in months. Below him, the crew moved with precision and purpose that transformed the ship into a living organism ready for action. The bridge communications crackled with reports from each department: engineering, navigation, weapons systems, radar, all reporting ready for sea. Sam Mitchell remained in the engine room, not as commander, but as observer. His official work was finished, but he couldn't resist being present for the moment when his months of labor would face their ultimate test. Around him, the crew he had trained operated the systems he had rebuilt with a competence that bordered on artistry. "All stations report ready for departure," announced Lieutenant Commander Sarah Walsh, the ship's executive officer. Her voice carried excitement barely contained by naval protocol. Like everyone else aboard, she had watched the Meridian transform from a floating embarrassment into something remarkable. Captain Rodriguez gave the order that had seemed impossible just 2 months earlier. "Cast off all lines. Take us to sea." The Meridian's engines responded with a smooth rumble that vibrated through the hull like a contented purr. Steam rose from her stacks in perfect white columns, and her screws bit into the water with authority that sent small waves racing toward shore. She moved away from the pier with the grace of a ship that knew her purpose. On the pier, Admiral Hawkins watched with satisfaction as the vessel that had been declared beyond repair cut cleanly through the harbor waters. But this was just the beginning. The real test would come in open ocean, where the Meridian would have to prove she could perform every function expected of a modern destroyer. 3 hours out to sea, the testing began in earnest. The ship's engines were pushed through every configuration, from fuel-efficient cruising to maximum emergency power. The electrical systems powered everything from basic lighting to the massive radar arrays that swept the horizon for targets. Communications equipment that had been silent for months now transmitted clearly across hundreds of miles. In the engine room, Sam watched his carefully rebuilt systems respond to each demand with perfect precision. The turbines that had been silent for so long now sang in harmony, their vibrations matching the frequency that every ship in this class had been designed to achieve. The fuel systems delivered clean, properly pressurized fuel to engines that burned it with an efficiency that exceeded original specifications. Engineering reports all systems operating at 110% of design capacity, Petty Officer Santos announced to the bridge, her voice filled with pride. The numbers on her screen showed performance levels that the ship's original builders had never achieved. The weapon systems test came next. Target drones launched from a nearby cruiser, and the Meridian's defensive systems tracked them with radar precision that impressed even the observers aboard the Admiral's helicopter. When the order came to engage, the ship's weapons fired with accuracy that placed every round exactly where intended. But the most impressive demonstration was yet to come. Captain Rodriguez received orders to execute a series of high-speed maneuvers that would test every system simultaneously. The Meridian responded like a thoroughbred, turning sharply at speeds that should have stressed her hull, accelerating and decelerating with precision that kept her perfectly stable despite the challenging sea conditions. From his position in the engine room, Sam monitored the stress readings on every major component. The modifications he had made weren't just repairs. They were improvements that allowed the ship to perform beyond her original capabilities. The harmony between systems that he had achieved through painstaking adjustment created an efficiency that military engineers would study for years. "All stop," Captain Rodriguez ordered as the formal testing concluded. The Meridian coasted to a gentle halt, her systems settling into idle with the quiet confidence of machinery that had proven itself completely. Admiral Hawkins's voice crackled over the radio. "USS Meridian, you are officially restored to active duty status. Congratulations to your entire crew on an outstanding performance." The cheers that echoed through the ship were genuine expressions of joy from sailors who had rediscovered their professional pride. They had been part of something extraordinary, the transformation of a failed vessel into one of the finest ships in the fleet. That evening, as the Meridian returned to port, Sam packed his few belongings with mixed emotions. His mission was complete, but leaving felt like abandoning family. The crew that had worked beside him for 2 months had become more than colleagues. They were partners in a resurrection that had changed all of their careers. Captain Rodriguez found him on deck, watching the lights of the harbor grow larger as they approached home port. "The crew wants to throw you a farewell party," the captain said, "and Admiral Hawkins has some kind of ceremony planned." Sam shook his head with a smile. I've never been much for ceremonies, Captain. The ship running properly is all the recognition I need. The Navy's offering you a consulting contract, full civilian authority to work on any ship that needs your particular skills. You could write your own ticket. For a moment, Sam was tempted. The satisfaction of bringing dead ships back to life, of teaching young sailors to think like artists instead of technicians, had rekindled a passion he thought was gone forever. But he also knew that what had happened aboard the Meridian was special, precisely because it had been unique. I think one miracle is enough, he said quietly. This crew doesn't need me anymore. They know how to listen to their ship now, how to treat her properly. That's worth more than any consultant contract. The farewell came at dawn, as Sam walked down the gangway for the last time. The crew lined the rails, not at attention but in genuine respect for a man who had changed their lives. No speeches were made, no ceremonies conducted. But every sailor aboard understood that they had been part of something that would define their naval careers. Petty Officer Santos stepped forward with a small package. From all of us, Chief. Sam. A little something to remember the Meridian. Inside was a small piece of brass bearing the ship's insignia, polished to mirror brightness and engraved with a simple message. To the man who taught us to listen. Sam pocketed the token without ceremony, but his eyes showed how much it meant to him. Take care of her, he said simply, then walked away without looking back. 6 months later, the USS Meridian was selected as the flagship for a Pacific deployment, her performance having earned recognition throughout the fleet. The crew that Sam had trained became teachers themselves, spreading his techniques and philosophy to other ships and other sailors. Admiral Hawkins kept the Meridian's transformation classified for years, but eventually it became a case study taught at the Naval Academy. Future officers learned about the importance of treating ships as integrated systems rather than collections of parts, about listening to what machinery was trying to communicate, and about the difference between following procedures and understanding principles. Sam Mitchell returned to his ranch in Montana, where he resumed his quiet retirement among the mountains and fields. But sometimes, when the wind was right, neighbors swore they could hear him talking to his old pickup truck, coaxing it to life with the same patient understanding he had shown a broken destroyer. The truck always started on the first try, purring like it was brand new. After all, Sam had learned long ago that all machines, from farm equipment to warships, just needed someone who knew how to listen to what they were trying to say. And somewhere in the Pacific, the USS Meridian continued to serve with distinction, her engines humming with the perfect harmony that one forgotten Navy veteran had taught them to achieve. She had been dead in the water, but she lived again, better than ever, carrying her crew safely through waters that would have challenged ships twice her age. The Meridian's resurrection had proved something that the Navy would never forget, that sometimes the most sophisticated technology needs the oldest wisdom, and that bringing something back to life requires understanding not just how it works, but why it wants to work at all.